Thank you for joining us for this week's episode. Looking forward to talk with another one.
Deuces. Please cut that out. Welcome back to another episode of Is Fitz Happy. I'm Emma.
And I'm Luke.
And we're here today to talk about Chapter 4, Apprenticeship.
Ah, yes. Where Fitz learns a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, lots of stuff.
Yeah. Meets another very important person as well.
Yeah. I'm really excited about this chapter. I have a lot to say about everything, I feel like. But when do I not have an opinion on everything? So...
I feel like that's the same with, me too. We've talked a lot so far about these books, and it's only chapter 4. Very excited to dive into this and keep going.
Yes. Okay, so we start with King Victor.
Yeah. This whole beginning story here basically seems like a parable to me. Like it's like they're learning history and they have these like little nuggets of wisdom. Who knows if they're actually true or not?
Fair, yeah.
But I feel like this one applies to at least one point in the chapter. And I know a lot of these header stories apply to the chapter that they're heading mainly. Yeah. But I think this one is kind of important in a couple places. So.
In which places?
We'll get to it.
Okay. There.
Anything specific you want to say about the story at all?
I think it's interesting that we have someone who would be queen of an area coming to eventually marry the king of Buck, but queen graciousness.
Yes.
And I think that's kind of an interesting contrast between her and Regal's mom, because it doesn't sound like she ever... I mean, I guess this is just a little tiny story, and who knows what she really was like, but it doesn't seem like she wants the throne. She came expecting the worst, but got to be a tutor.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, I think that's the same duchy that Regal's mom is from. Queen Desire, I think, is from Pharaoh. It's the conquered the inland territories that eventually became the Duchy of Pharaoh.
Yeah, I think they're from Tillith, but...
Oh, okay.
But Tillith and Pharaoh are kind of always mentioned together.
Yeah.
So, because they're, I think I guess
like
I don't...
landlocked or something.
Yeah, they're the two inland duchies. Yeah. But Sand's Edge, like the brandy, also. Important little point there. But I really like the quote, a ruler must be of all his people, for one can only rule what one knows. And I guess I just like that the king is all about the people and wants to be a better king and make a better kingdom and rule well, which is nice to see and kind of shows how the duchies all work, because it is a bunch of dukes kind of ruling their own area and then deferring to the king. So it's interesting to see that it's always been something that has been worked on to get them all to be one nation, but celebrating the differences in each area.
Right, yeah. So it's a lot to handle, and it's a really good lesson. And that's specifically the quote that I had highlighted as well for later.
Okay.
But we move on to Fitz waking up.
Yes.
He's real tired.
Woke up. He went to bed early.
Yeah.
And wakes up late. I can relate to that, but yeah. But I think it's interesting that he feels uneasy that someone could enter his chamber and move freely without waking him, which is something that he seems to think about a lot. But I always just thought it was because he was trained to be an assassin. I guess I didn't remember that even this early he thinks about it as something that he's not comfortable with.
I think it comes down to his wit abilities in general, because he's usually used to seeing or feeling all of the life around him.
Yeah.
So he must have been extremely tired after horse riding and then sword fighting and everything to go to bed early and then not recognize when another life form goes into his room.
Yeah,
So,
true. Fair. I mean,
I sleep like the dead in the morning, so I can relate really hard to that.
and I guess, I mean, he hasn't really been working out before this, and he's basically just worked out all day the day before, so I'd be pretty tired too.
Speaking of working out, he runs down to the stables. Eric is like, no, they need you up at the castle. He runs to the kitchens to ask after Mistress Hasty, the seamstress. And then he eventually makes his way back to his own room and then a few doors down from that to find her.
Yeah. What a fun little morning exercise.
Yeah.
Get yourself
he's like
woken up.
trotting everywhere and all the sores from yesterday are waking up in his body. And, ooh.
And he doesn't even want the clothes, which, what a, 10-year-old boy thing to do. Like, I don't even need clothes. My clothes don't fit me, but whatever. But yeah, so then we're introduced to Mistress Hasty.
And Mistress Hasty is surrounded by 2 other women in there.
And also a guy that doesn't ever get brought up again after we just briefly touch
I
on him.
completely forgot about him, yeah.
He's at the wheel.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I think it's wool. Let me check. Hold on.
Probably. It's Buckkeep. It's probably wool. It's summer. They got to have their wool ready for their winter clothes.
A lad not much older than I was rocking to the gentle pace of a spinning wheel. So I guess I don't know what he's spinning. That's usually yarn, I think. I don't know
Yeah.
for sure, but yeah.
And they just gossip the whole time.
Yeah.
And I just want to note, before we get into what they're talking about, this whole passage with them feels like the seamstress's name. It's so quick and fast-paced, and there's just a massive paragraph of line after line of information that we receive that Fitz doesn't know because he's 10 years old and everything kind of flies above him. I think it was very clever of Robin Hobb to pack all that info in to show us, the reader, what's going on, to make us understand. Even if Fitz, as a 10-year-old, didn't really collect all this information before, this is what's been happening around, and it shows us a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And the first thing that they talk about, really, is patience.
Yes. Ugh, this part was really frustrating for me personally to read. Just because, I guess, I don't know, I feel it as a girl, as a woman. I just thought it was really ridiculous that they're talking about how she should be ashamed. And let's see. It specifically says that Chivalry's stamp is much too plain on his face to leave her any pride at all. Which is like, oh, you can tell this kid is Chivalry's, so poor Patience. And it just was so frustrating. Like, they're talking about how horrible it is for Chivalry that he had to step down, and then they're talking like Patience is nothing and it's her fault. And it's like, hello, Patience doesn't have any control in this situation. She can't help that she can't have kids. She can't help that, you know, it's not like none of this is her fault at all. And they're still like, oh, she should feel ashamed because she can't have any kids. And it's just so stupid. And I just got really frustrated reading how they were so lenient towards Chivalry. Not that they don't talk bad about him later, but in this specific instance about a child, they're like, oh, she should feel ashamed that she doesn't have a kid of her own. And I don't know.
And they never specifically call out that Patience should be ashamed. They kind of speak, oh, we're commiserating with her. It's so sad, but it's all around the edges of like,
yes. Which is super real, I guess. Like, I don't know. It does feel like a real conversation you would overhear.
Yeah.
A real gossip.
And we do get a confirmation that Patience is barren, that there were multiple miscarriages.
Yeah.
And that her health is frail in general. And this is really where Fitz learns the full story of how the news of himself was received when it got to Buck.
Yeah.
because all of this happened before Fitz actually made it to Buckkeep. Mm-hmm. So it's presented to a child of 10 years old for the first time.
Yeah, which would be really hard. I mean,
In 4 years, yeah.
Yeah, it's not his fault that any of this happened. And you can just see how a child would take in this information and be like, oh, it's my fault. And like,
oh, and he talks about it later
Yeah.
too in this chapter. This is where he first learns it, and it kind of just preys on his mind for a while.
yeah, well, because he already kind of thinks that it's something to do with him, right? We know that he feels weird about the fact that he's a bastard. He knows it's not a good thing. So I could see how he could probably, before this, feel a little bit of maybe guilt, but not really sure. And this maybe just cements that, you know? I don't know if any of that made sense, but just, I can see how, like, you would maybe be like, maybe I'm the problem, but I don't know. And then hear an adult talk and be like, oh no, it really is me.
Yeah. I'm curious of what you think of the gossip itself. Do you think it's true that, quote, patience took my existence as the ultimate rebuke, and her health, never sound after so many miscarriages, completely broke along with her spirit? Do you think hearing of Fitz broke her down and, like, helped make chivalry make that decision to step down?
That's what I don't know. I think it would be really hard. If I was putting myself in her shoes, it would be really hard, especially after a lot of miscarriages.
Right,
You're
yeah.
trying for a baby to then find out that your husband has a child and, like, he didn't even tell you. You don't know if he knew or not. You just know that he hasn't told you. Now you've found out. And I would assume he would tell her that he knew, but who knows at this point. And I could see how that would just hurt. And you would just be so upset and hurt that maybe it would seem to others like it broke you.
Yeah.
But I think she is just such a strong woman in general. I don't think it fully broke her. I think it just really hurt her feelings.
She is, I mean, it would hurt anybody's feelings.
Yeah,
She is a very strong woman, but at the same time, she's extremely, I don't know if flighty is the word. I could just say eccentric, I guess.
Yeah.
Where she has different fits of emotions when she first sees Fitz
Yeah.
chivalry and talks to him. She goes from raging to weepy to calm and like, why haven't you learned this yet?
Yeah.
So I'm really curious as to how she acted when she
Right.
first learned it. I could see her. It later says in here that Patience blamed Beric as well for chivalry's lapse
Yes.
in morals and had declared that she could no longer abide the sight of the man. I completely believe that.
Yeah.
That she flew off into a rage and like, no, this man drew my man astray eventually. And so I'm really curious as to how much chivalry's death and that announcement shook her health. If she is the same as we meet her later in the series, or if she was slightly different earlier before this.
Yeah.
Because there's always a little bit of truth to gossip, but this is, we really don't know.
Yeah, we don't. And I mean, she is young.
Yeah.
So I could see her being even more erratic with emotions. I don't know. But also, I don't see this as something that she would have, like, I guess every time I think about this, I think it's odd that she wouldn't have just wanted to meet Fitz to begin with.
Right.
I understand that she would be upset and angry, and I know that she would probably not want to at first, but just thinking about how badly she wants a child, and this is somebody who looks just like her husband, which I guess I don't know if she knew that yet, but it just always seemed odd to me that it's always put as like, oh, Patience couldn't handle it. And she's so strong and so nurturing and just a wonderful person. Obviously, I'm biased because I really like her, but
Who doesn't? Patience is the best.
she's so cool. I want to be Patience. She doesn't care what anybody thinks. She's going to do her own thing. Role model. But I guess she probably did get upset. I would believe that she got upset and probably said the stuff about Beric.
It could be the reason why she hasn't come back to Buckkeep or anything to see him it could be because of chivalry / they don't want the prince or the former king in waiting to come back to steal any of Verity's thunder.
True.
And I think that would be a royal discussion. And then they're like, no, I can't leave Patience. So if you want to go by yourself, sure, but I can't.
And see, that's what I wonder too. I wonder if chivalry has kind of put it out there that, oh, the reason that I can't do this anymore and that I'm leaving is for Patience's health, and kind of blaming her and not taking that blame, and that she's letting him because she knows that his image is so probably pretty important to him.
See, I don't think it's chivalry. It's the Chade and shrewd propaganda machine working in the background. And there's a later sentence in here that says that they're talking about Verity.
Yes. Yep.
And they're like, oh,
he'd make a much better king in waiting.
Now there's a man among men, a king folk could look to and see his royalty. He rode hard, soldiered hard, and that's such propaganda and such a success of the scheming minds of the two half brothers.
Oh yeah, I read that and I was like, that's Chade's work right there.
Oh yeah, to flip everything around from chivalry, because chivalry would make a better king than Verity.
Yes.
Like objectively, he would. Some people would get, kind of upset by him being so perfect all the time, but he is such a good diplomat. We have so many good examples. Mm-hmm. And then to have that turned around after, a couple years and be like, of course Verity would be better the whole time.
Yeah.
It's such a success to see that attitude just be gossiped around like it's normal.
Yeah. Like everybody always thought that anyway.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But they do talk bad about Burek as well.
Yes, old Burek. He's 30.
Yeah, they mentioned that too. It's like old Burek, they called him, and him still in his prime. But apparently he was a hottie, like a real hottie.
Yeah.
I just want to read this here. Was a time when no woman of the keep walked quickly past him. To catch his eyes was to make yourself the envy of nearly anyone old enough to wear skirts.
Yeah.
Wow.
I get it. He's strong. He's muscular.
He was connected.
Yeah, he was connected. Ugh. I don't know. Burek just reads as a hot guy.
Old Burek.
Old Burek.
Gamefoot Burek.
Hey, be nice. At one point, he wasn't old Gamefoot Burek, or game knee. I don't know. Game leg.
True. Yeah, so Fitz is kind of getting like a whole education in what everyone thinks of the people that he looks up to, or have only heard from Burek's perspective, or like have just been talked about in circumstantial ways.
Yeah.
And he's just getting it straight up to the face. A tidal wave of information.
Yep. Just all at once.
All the while, fabrics were shoved against him and debated, and then he got shooed out of the room. And the whole thing is, it's like I said at the beginning, it's written so well and so cleverly that it feels like it happened in a whirlwind. It feels like it happened so fast, and then it just kind of like shoved out, and you're like, okay, we're carrying on with the rest of the chapter.
Yep.
But it was just a full block of interesting things that Fitz just learned.
Yeah, which is information the reader has been missing.
Yeah.
And that we needed to know anyway. So it's just a clever way to do it.
There is one sentence in here I do want to point out. Chivalry is 100% Fitz's father. There's a huge parallel here where it says, chivalry, substantially quieter a man than he had been before, was gradually learning stewardship of his vineyard-rich valley, talking about Withy Woods. And that's literally Tom Badgerlock later in the series.
I thought that too. I was like, hey, he is basically his dad.
Yeah, it's exactly what he had to learn to slow down, to learn stewardship of the valley, and not be the center of everything, of all these intrigues and things like that. So it's a really cool parallel.
Yeah.
So it kind of continues on where Fitz goes back to Hod, exercises more, gets more sword work in, and then gets his clothes back eventually after a few days.
Yes. And when he gets his clothes back, he notices that his clothes have a leaping buck. Or no.
No, not a leaping buck. The soldiers wore the leaping buck.
Yes.
His has the stag's head on it.
But
The buck's head.
it had a slash of red stitching that cut it diagonally.
And he asked Bjork about it because he doesn't really know what it means.
Yeah.
And it's basically
And
used in,
Bjork just straight up
Yep.
says, it means you're a bastard.
just like, he named him Fitz.
Bjork brings up that he could now choose a name and a crest of his own, and that seems to surprise Fitz. And of course, Bjork is just super like,
He's very relaxed and chill. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's normal.
of course, just pick a name. And I did want to, before we talk about the name section, point out that Bjork says, bastards are rare in the noble houses, especially so in the king's own, which made me laugh now that I'm rereading this because, let's see, there's Fitz. We also know of Chade. But then later, Chade has 2 illegitimate children. Fitz has an illegitimate child. And, everybody...
I'm sure Regal had a few.
Oh, the only reason it's rare in the royal family is because it's rare that their money can't shut the person up.
Yeah. It's rare to be acknowledged. I
Fitz just happens
would be
to
a
look
better.
just like his dad.
Yep.
So I just wanted to point out that he says it's rare. And it's like, well, seems like it's about 1 per generation that seems to be acknowledged at least. So... After that little portion, Bjork tells Fitz that he should pick a name for himself. And Fitz is like, what name? What do you choose? And Bjork is, whatever name, it doesn't matter. And
Whatever you like.
yeah, whatever you like. And Fitz says that it wouldn't be real because... a name I just put to myself, it wouldn't feel like it was really mine. And that's obviously true. And Bjork is like not even thinking about that, which is weird to me that Bjork is just so nonchalant. But I guess...
I wonder if he picked his own name.
maybe.
I don't know.
I don't know either. But it just seems odd that he's so weird about the name thing.
Yeah.
Because then he doesn't want to name Fitz either.
Well, Fitz is weird about the name thing, too.
Yeah.
He never selects a name of his own in these early books.
Yeah.
He goes by Boy, which he didn't know if he was just repeating what Jason said, is Boy. He goes by Fitz, which is what Bjork calls him.
Yeah.
And he goes by Fitz Chivalry, which is a name that Verity gives him. He doesn't really take one of his own. He goes by Catalyst and Changer as well.
Which is something the Fool gave him.
And Changer from Night Eyes, I think. And the only really one he takes is after Fitz dies is Tom Badgerlock.
And that's Patience's name for him.
Yeah, and Tom was Patience's name.
Yeah.
And it's basically a disguise. He only calls himself Badgerlock. That's like the only thing that he claims as his own name.
But I guess it would be hard. I mean, everybody makes such a big deal about him not having a name.
Right.
But he is a kid. Like, he can't... You don't ask people to name themselves. Like, I don't know.
Some people have strong feelings of identity and who they want to be, and that's
Yes.
perfectly fine, but a
Yes.
10-year-old kid is not one of them.
No. Honestly, surprised he's not like, I want to be New Boy Soldier Arms. That's my new name.
But they continue to talk about names, and Bjork's like, just think about it for yourself for a while. You'll come up with a name that fits. And Fitz replies, Fitz, sarcastically. And Bjork is a little put out by that because, it's a 10-year-old kid, and it's the first time he's like talking smack back at him.
Getting a little tooty.
Yeah.
Attitude. Yes.
And he's like, let's just mend this leather.
What a dad thing. Like, I'm not even going to acknowledge the attitude. Let's just... And Fitz won't let it be.
Yep. they continue to talk about how bastards aren't rare in the town, and Burek talks about
how he's a romantic.
He's a romantic, and that he wants women to be respected, and he wants Fitz to have a good outlook on relationships between men and women. And he didn't want to go out on the town or anything like that while they were there, and that when he finds a woman he wants to settle down with, that he wants to know that all the children are his.
Which, ironic, because his first child isn't even his.
Yep.
He knows that, though. I mean, it's not like it's a surprise, but...
Yeah, because later, I mean, Nettle is Fitz's, so...
But, I don't know, it's kind of sweet to know that this guy who had such, like, all the girls wanted him, and he was such a player, that, like, actually, he just wants to find the one.
I mean, a little prude and chaste and everything, but it's an outdated society in general.
But, you know,
but
if
very,
that's what
very romantic, and he has his morals, and his right and wrong meter is fixed straight.
He will never change what he thinks is right or wrong.
No, for sure.
But after that little revelation, Fitz asks what happened with his dad then.
It's just more doubts that have crept into his mind since Mrs. Hasty's, appointment with him.
Yeah. And Burek doesn't know.
Yeah.
And seems to be just as disappointed in chivalry. He does try to, well, he says they're not excuses, but he basically makes excuses for him at first, because he was only 20 and far from home and trying to shoulder a heavy burden, and they're not excuses, but...
It's as much as either of us will know, so... Yeah, I think he's kind of resigned to the fact, but he does not like talking about it, how his friend and mentor...
Somebody he really looked up to.
His king.
Yeah.
Failed. Veered from Burek's own moral course and moral compass.
Yeah.
So Fitz settles into kind of a routine.
Yeah.
Lots of practice and lots of chores.
Yes.
And it says, I found myself mostly alone. Loneliness. And it talks about him, trying to sleep and trying to fall into comfortable dreams, but he's used to the horses and the dogs around him and all their dreams coming into his mind and helping him sleep. And he lies awake and wonders about his father and his mother and how both of them could have dismissed me from their lives so easily.
Yeah.
I heard the talk that others exchanged so carelessly over my head and interpreted their comments in my own terrifying way. It's exactly a consequence of hearing all of that gossip straight up right away. And now he's in the keep itself. He's not really sequestered in the stables with Burek.
Yeah.
He's around people and errand boys and maids and everyone that will gossip and talk about his heritage, his parents, what happened, why is he here, what got messed up.
And he doesn't sense a single friend. And it is the first time that he is away from so many animals. I mean, I guess we don't know his first 6 years, what those were like, but he's been staying with Burek over these animals that must have given him some sense of comfort, because he could feel connected to them. So, and that's the wit. And he was just closer with beings, whereas in this castle, everybody's so spread apart that it wouldn't feel like you were with anybody.
Yeah.
So that would be really lonely.
He's feeling incredibly lonely. And then we get an introduction to Chade.
Yes.
Who is also an extremely lonely man.
And a little bit of a creep.
A little bit of a creep, but...
Not gonna lie.
I mean... He's been living alone in the walls for 20 to 25 years.
So it's not really his fault he doesn't know tact. But also maybe don't stand at the end of a child's bed. Just the image of, like, sleeping, and then like you're a child, and then a grown man that looks really scary holding a lamp right over you, like, follow me. I just like, he didn't think once, like, maybe I should gently wake him, not just stare at him.
It says he couldn't decide how old he was, and since we kind of ballparked Chade as around 47 to 50-ish, Chade is an older half-brother to Chade, so he's probably anywhere
Mid-50s?
from 50 to 55 or
Yeah.
so, which puts him, I believe, at the end of the series over 100.
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy. I mean, they have skill.
Yeah,
but
he
still,
is using
like,
a lot of skill to keep
Yeah.
himself together, but
that means, like, in his 70s, he was
Yeah.
fathering multiple illegitimate children.
yeah. I mean, hey, you know, he has needs. He was in a wall for a really long time.
I mean, he was. Well, we know that about Chade. He was, like I said before, an older half-brother to Chade.
Yes.
He was dropped off kind of like how Fitz was. I believe his mother died and his father dropped him off or something like that. I don't recall exactly the details. But he grew up in court. He was trained unknowingly as an assassin.
Yes.
But he also became, I think Chade later calls himself more arrogant and more obsessed with his looks than Regal ever was, and more vain, which is crazy. And then he had a potion blow up in his face that he was working on, sequestered himself away, and then left Buckkeep for a while. When he came back, everyone thought he died. So he introduced himself to, or re-met with Chade, and Chade recognized him, and then he's been living in the walls ever since.
Yeah. And Chade forgot about him.
He says that, but I think it's just the brother joke kind of thing.
Maybe, I guess. I was just like, oh. But also, I just want to quickly point out that Chade is not his real name.
I saw that too. So Chade leads Fitz up to the room, and one side of the room is super comfortable looking, with books around, multiple scrolls, multiple rugs on the ground, easy chairs, tapestries on the wall, a fire.
Fresh
and
fruit.
then literally right down the middle on the other half of the room is a mess, and it probably smells of sciencey powders and random alchemical things.
It's super dusty.
It's super
There's
dusty.
half-stopped projects that maybe got stopped months, even years ago.
So Fitz looks very upset by this, and Shade's like, oh, I guess it's a mess. Anyways, we'll introduce ourselves, and they go to the comfortable side, and he says something about his name, which I highlighted too, and it's, man, I don't understand fully.
I did not remember this. He asks what Fitz's name is.
Yeah, I didn't really remember it either. He kind of asks Fitz to, if he agrees with what he's going to learn. And Fitz is like, yeah, sure. And he's like, good, now we'll make some introductions. You can call me Chade, and what shall I call you? He paused and waited, and when I did not offer a name, he filled in, boy. That's not names for either of us, but they'll do for the time we'll have together.
And he never is anything other than Chade.
Yeah. So I was kind of wondering if that is a mistake and that's actually his name, or if it's a name he took when he died to the court and none of the court remembered him. Because when he comes out later, he's Chade Falstar, and his illegitimate children, Lant and Shine, have Falstar as a last name. So I'm sure Falstar was like his actual name, his last name, but I don't know if Chade was.
I don't know. I mean, I guess we'll have to look out for it. I didn't think to look, but I don't know if anybody says that they like remember him specifically, you know? I mean, he's really old.
I know
so
Verity does.
Well, Verity would.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, the people of the court, you know?
I don't think anybody
They just know
does.
that he's a old bastard.
Yeah.
That he was just, he's an illegitimate born royal. but nobody really knows. So, I mean, maybe he just wanted... I mean, we know that his face is very disformed now, so maybe he just didn't want people to associate his young, handsome, youthful face with his new face.
Maybe it's his Tom Badgerlock.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know either.
Chade is his name to me.
Yes, and he keeps lots of secrets, so it doesn't surprise me that he never talks about it.
I think there's only once where we learn about his background, and that's in the literal last trilogy.
Yep.
On his deathbed. So, so he kind of talks at Fitz and asks him if he wants to learn to be an assassin because he never got the choice of what he was learning, and that was his stipulation to Shrewd.
But he doesn't really give any other options.
No, he doesn't. I mean, I guess Fitz could say no, and then that would be like, well, he doesn't want to learn. But I think Chade would have taught him anyways.
Yeah.
And I think Chade is kind of sad about that in general. There's a couple times where he's described as he nods sadly. He nods with like a hint of regret or things like that.
Yeah.
I think Chade is very happy to have somebody to talk to because it mentions a few times that he's like chattering on and making odd comments. And he talks about how I wish Galen would teach you the skill, but he refuses to teach you, and it's a shame.
I do want to talk about that for a second. Galen refuses to teach Fitz.
Yep.
Which, who is Galen that he can just say no to the king? Because presumably the king asked Galen, and he gets to say no, but Chade can't say no. That's just not right, because... But also, I didn't realize Galen was, like, old. Not old, but, like... I mean, I guess we know that he trained with Chivalry and Verity.
Yeah, he was above them, so he helped train them.
He's probably around his 30s.
I would say at least upper 30s would be my guess, because I know he was a few years older than Chivalry and Verity. Mid 30s maybe.
Okay.
Upper 30s.
See, I guess in my mind he was the same age as Regal, and I don't know why. Maybe just because they work together.
Oh yeah.
And so I just
because
thought,
they're brothers as well.
Oh yeah.
But like half brothers, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah, but Galen was almost done with his tutelage. He was like I think a journeyman skill user when Solicity died, and he was helping teach Verity and Chivalry.
Yeah.
And they didn't quite reach that level either, as far as I remember.
Yeah, because he's not a very good teacher. So.
No, and he wanted to keep the secrets to himself anyways.
Which doesn't make sense, because you're going to die eventually, so...
Right.
But whatever. So anyway, I just thought it was interesting that he is the one refusing, and that he even has the ability to say no. But I guess
his loyalties lie in a different direction anyways.
True.
And he's the skill master.
But still, if the king asks you, it feels like you can't say no. Apparently you can, and nothing happens to you. But anyway.
But I do want, like, the skill is an interesting topic to bring up, because Chade has been desperately yearning for that all of his life. And we see that come out in a very bad way later when Fitz does learn the skill, and when they get the skill scrolls even later on. Chade kind of dives headfirst, and he feels like he was left out of that, and it was part of his birthright.
Yeah.
So even though it's a passing comment, it really has shades of what's to come.
So Chade talks to Fitz a little bit about murder, which he's like, well, I'm going to teach you. And Fitz is like waiting for him, to continue. And he's like, it's murder, more or less. Like, okay, that's not how you bring up that topic to a 10-year-old, in my opinion. But I guess I don't know a better way. But it was very funny that he just blatantly, it's murder, more or less. Killing people, the fine art of diplomatic assassination. Just, Chade.
I do want to preface this with, he led with, you are a king's man now. You have his loyalty. Maybe you'll be asked for service later, but right now you have to be loyal. And then he's like, we're going to be learning murder. And then he's like, are you okay with this? And Fitz is, when pressed, he's like, I don't like the idea of killing somebody. And Chade says, I don't like it either. But can you learn?
Yes.
And maybe you'll decide later, which is such a big question to ask a 10-year-old. Because a 10-year-old has just been lectured on loyalty. He just gave his loyalty to a king directly.
Who may or may not have skilled in him the desire to want to be loyal.
Right. And now he's like, can you learn for your king? And he's like, yes, I can, and I'll decide later.
Yeah.
And then Fitz kills 3 years later at like 13 years old.
Ugh.
So it's pretty leading, but I still love Chade, even though he is very sketchy as a person.
Yeah. And he does encourage Fitz to talk to him.
Oh, yeah.
To tell him what he's thinking, and says, you won't be punished. Tell me, I can't teach you unless you talk to me.
Bjerk sets a great example as a man, but Chade is the one who really brings out everything that Fitz becomes, basically. His intelligence, the actual skills of what he has and everything like that. He's an extremely important person to Fitz's development.
Yes.
Even if there are some not so great habits learned by him as well.
That's
like
fair.
The frequent use of herbs to help yourself and things like that.
Yeah.
They clean up the apartment then. Chade kind of, we'll start now. Help me clean.
Yeah, also big mood. If I had a kid and my house was messy, I'd be like, yeah, we're going to learn murder. The first step to murder is that you have to clean my house.
He does help side by side.
Yes. But also, step one, clean house. You got to do it.
We meet Slink, his weasel.
His little weasel.
And he has 3 lizards chilling in his room, too.
Yeah, I totally forgot that he
has random, eclectic collections of literally everything that he wants.
Why not? You live in a wall. Yeah. Might as well be a weirdo.
After they're done, they sit by the fire and are relaxing a little bit, and Fitz is staring at Chade. And Chade kind of misinterprets that. Yeah. Because Fitz has been terrified of Chade for a long time. But after cleaning with him, he kind of gets used to him. He's nicer. Now he's not so much terrified as just staring at the scars. And Fitz is noticed staring, obviously, because it's Chade. And he's like, seems familiar, doesn't it, boy? My face, I mean.
How often do you think in his life people were like, oh, you look just like your brother, the king? Like, because that's the first thing he thinks. He doesn't even think, oh, maybe it's because I have these weird scars.
Well, he's not used to people reacting to his scars either, because he hid from everybody.
True.
I mean, that's what Fitz gets every time. Oh, you look like your father. Like, oh,
you'd get so used to that.
Yeah, so Chade immediately goes to that. And Fitz, in his head, in the narration, just right away, seems familiar, doesn't it? It didn't. I had been staring at the grotesque scars on the pasty white skin.
Little harsh, but I mean, he was raised by Bjerk, so...
Yep. And he says, don't trouble yourself about it, boy. It leaves its tracks on all of us, and sooner or later, you'll get the tumble of it. Obviously, he's talking about being a Farseer as well, and a bastard of the royal line.
Yeah.
And then he kind of sends him on his way, walks him back down to his room.
And tucks him in. Which, I made note that he smoothed the blankets over me as no one had done since I'd left Bjerk's chambers.
Bjerk did it too.
Bjerk has been tucking him into bed this whole time and we didn't know. Excuse me, Robin Hobb, but where was that content? I would have loved that content. Thank you very much.
The important content we need.
Bjerk and Chade both tuck him in. It's cute.
And obviously, since he probably didn't go to bed until like 3 a.m. and probably had to wake up at 6 to get down for his chores in time, he oversleeps.
Yep.
And Bjerk is real mad at him because he oversleeps. Because Bjerk doesn't know anything about this.
No, not at all. But this part kind of made me chuckle a little.
Well, yeah, any shade thrown at Regal makes you chuckle.
That's fair. I really just don't like Regal. But Bjerk saying that, you know, just because you have a room in a castle and a crest on your jerkin, don't think that you can just turn into some sprawl about rogue who snores in his bed until all hours and then only rises to fluff at his hair. I'll not have it. Fitz is like, oh, like Regal?
You mean Regal, don't you?
And Bjerk is like, uh-oh.
He's like, what? Nope.
And I wonder if, in my mind, I wonder if he was like thinking of Regal or if he was just like...
I'm 100% sure it's subconscious. Bjerk is way too proper to straight out say that.
True. And besides, he would have straight up said, don't be like Regal, if he meant Regal. But I just thought it was funny that Fitz is like, oh, like Regal?
Yeah. Well, and when Fitz says that, Bjerk opened his mouth and then shut it. His wind-reddened cheeks grew redder. Neither you nor I, he muttered at last, are in a position to criticize any of the princes. I meant only as a general rule that sleeping the morning away ill befits a man, and even less so a boy. And never a prince, I said this, and then stopped to wonder where the thought had come from. And never a prince, Bjerk agreed grimly. So yeah. I'm pretty sure when it was brought up, Bjerk's like, I was thinking of Regal, but no, it is not good for anyone to do it. And then
we don't need to talk about the princes. We're talking about you.
And then Fitz gets a couple good stories about his father leading and setting a good example and being a diplomat.
Chivalry is a guy who didn't expect any more of people than he expected of himself. And he led by example.
Yeah.
And it didn't always make him popular, but his soldiers respected him.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of sad to see the glimmer of what could have been. Because, like, really before this, we hear a little bit about how he's a goody two-shoes, but we don't really see chivalry, like examples of who he was for real and not just a passing comment of, oh, looks like he wasn't as perfect as he seems.
And apparently he had a real head for wine.
Yeah. Hey.
I'm wondering if that's the skill, helping burn it away a little bit.
Oh, maybe.
Could drink a bunch at a lord's table, skill away some of the fuzziness from the alcohol, and then negotiate a little bit better.
That would be an interesting use of skill, although I'm not sure ethical.
I think Fitz uses it later on in the series.
Maybe.
I'm not positive, but I seem to vaguely remember something like, oh, it must have healed some of what my body thought was poison inside of me or something like that. I don't remember fully. But Fitz calls himself a bastard, and it says that he heard it so often but so seldom said it. And Bjerk just replies, be your blood boy and ignore what anyone else thinks of you. Fitz says, sometimes I get tired of doing the hard things. So do I.
Do you think that when Bjerk says be your blood, that he's kind of talking to himself too? Not just from his experience being a slave, but like what he's going through right now?
Maybe. It's quite possible. I mean, they're both going through a lot of the same kind of things, so a lot of his advice could be just kind of what he reiterates to himself to get through.
Get those self-affirmations in.
Yeah. Sometimes I get tired of doing the hard things, and the agreement of so do I is, it
really
feels
big.
like a, man, retweet that out.
Yeah.
Like, that is...
Yeah. And, I mean, who doesn't, you know?
Yeah.
Like, it is hard to do the hard things all the time. But, you know.
They have a pretty heartfelt and very insightful line of questioning and conversation for a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
And a 28-year-old or a 26-year-old. No.
And he's 30.
Is he 30 right now?
Well, because he's the same age as Chivalry. And
oh, sure.
yeah.
4 years
Because Fitz
later.
is 10.
Yep.
So.
And a 10-year-old and a 30-year-old have, that's they're talking about how you think if you could do better, chivalry will want you back. And
Yeah.
Eric's like, no, that ship has sailed, basically.
Because it wouldn't be the same as before.
Yeah. Things have changed, and as much as Burek hates to admit it, they've changed and he needs to move on. Mm-hmm. And in his eyes, they have not changed for the better for either of them.
Yeah.
For chivalry or for Burek.
No.
So.
And poor Fitz, when he asks, it's all my fault he went away, isn't it?
And the words of the weaving woman echoed in my head, but for the boy, he'd still be in line to be king. It's that gossip. Like, it's just...
Yeah, it gets to you.
If you hear it constantly, it really messes
Especially
with you.
if you haven't met your dad.
Right.
You don't know any better because nobody's saying anything against that. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I just... Ugh.
You know he's out there. He knows of you, and he doesn't reach out.
Nope.
Like, that's... Man. That hurts.
Yeah. And Burek has to, like, reason with himself. And I think this is the first time he's realized... I mean, in my mind, I read this as Burek realizing that it's not Fitz's fault. And this is a kid who he's grown to love, asking if it's his fault that all this is happening. And he has to realize that, no, it's chivalry's fault. Like, you didn't ask to be born. You didn't ask for any of these things to happen. So it's... And he's a grown adult. He made his choices. But, yeah, I don't know. I think maybe this is the first time Burek has really had to think about how Fitz is being affected by things.
Right, and really acknowledging it out loud in general. And he says, no, chivalry brought his downfall on himself, though that's a hard thing for me to say. And Fitz kind of mumbles under his breath into his horse's shoulder, and your downfall too. And Burek hears it. And he's like, I do well enough for myself, Fitz. I do well enough.
Which, poor Burek. And I'm sure Fitz is just, like, kind of upset, and I don't think he meant it to be hurtful.
No,
he just
not at
is
all.
Acknowledging that that's what happened. And I'm sure Burek is just, that's a fresh wound that hasn't healed.
And Fitz is kind of repeating what he's heard, too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a fall from grace for both of them. Mm-hmm. And it's incredibly insightful, even if you are just repeating some things for a 10-year-old to make those. So
Yeah.
it kind of shows that it kind of reinforces that people with the old blood are never really children, and they do have that empathy
Yeah.
from being connected to all living people and that awareness. Mm-hmm. And Burek comes around and changes the subject and asks why you're talking so much.
What's gotten into you?
And he's pretty happy about it because it's a change. It's definitely a change from being cooped up with animals and being quiet, and Burek worrying all the time.
Mm-hmm. Which we didn't know Burek was worried. That's why he was worried. He was so quiet. We didn't even know he was worried about Fitz being so quiet.
We don't hear a lot about or learn a lot about Burek's thoughts and worries except through these first few chapters, because Burek he becomes more of a distant character. Mm-hmm. He's always in there and he's always important.
Yeah.
But his thoughts don't really come through because they're mostly concerns about Fitz, talked directly and through conversations with Fitz.
Yeah.
But these early worries we don't really learn about except in circumstantial ways like this. So it's really interesting to read about it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I guess, I mean, Burek is the stern dad that has to set all the rules so he can't have any weaknesses. And now we have Chade, and he's the cool dad that doesn't care. You can do whatever you want.
I don't even think he's the crazed uncle that buys him the fireworks, but then he tells him to set him off, but then he's like, okay, but also count how many grains of gunpowder are in there. Tell me, and then recreate it.
Yep. Yeah, so.
And then Fitz kind of has a monologue in his head, a discussion with himself about how Byrrc is a changed man. He is different from what he has heard before. And the last line is, the first time since he had known him, my wariness of him was tinged with pity.
Yeah.
And I don't think this is the saddest that we've seen Byrrc. I think a couple chapters ago was incredibly sad for him, more conversations, at least for me.
Yeah.
This one is more of him starting to accept his role.
I think this one is sad and that
it's still sad.
Yeah, no, but I think it's a different kind of sad. Like before, it's sad because Byrrc is really going through it and he is sad and you can just tell he's really struggling. And now it kind of feels like the fight has gone out of him. And you can just tell that, like, he knows he's less now. And that's not true. I think Byrrc is still as great now as he was then. But he's lost a part of himself.
He's different. He's much different now.
And that's sad. But he's, I don't think, as sad as he was before. Just his situation is sad, and that's probably where the pity comes in, which is also, I hate to think that Fitz is feeling pity towards his father figure,
right?
Because pity is so hard when you're going through something. You hate it when somebody's pitying you.
Oh yeah,
it's just not a good feeling. And so especially if it's like you're a parent figure, which I don't know if Byrrc ever knows that Fitz pitied him, but
you feel bad enough for yourself. You don't want anybody else to feel bad for you too, because then it makes it real. All of these chapters leave off on a rough note.
I know.
Fitz is utterly lonely in this chapter.
Yeah.
And he's kind of kept too busy to feel sad or happy at all, ever. Yeah. He's just tired. But I would say he's mostly sad because he's so lonely all the time. He doesn't have any friends. He's separated from Byrrc, and even though he wasn't really that comfortable around him anymore, he didn't really love him anymore, they were in a routine. They were content with one another being where they were in their place. And now he's thrust into all these new situations. He's learning under Byrrc a little bit, Chade a little bit, Chade a little bit, but none of those relationships have advanced past anything that is just a mere passing teacher-student relationship at this point.
Yeah.
Wish we had more happy things to say.
Yeah.
He and Chade do eventually become great friends.
Yeah. Well, I think, there's a hint that that's going to be something because it says that when they're talking together, like, Chade talks to him like they're both old men or perhaps young boys.
Yeah.
And so
they were both craving companionship so much that they just kind of latched on to one another, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess Fitz doesn't know Chade is a bastard yet.
Right.
But, you know, Chade knows. And I'm sure it's...
Chade is drawn to that as well.
Yeah. Because who knows better than somebody who has had to go through...
You can sympathize a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, if you have anything to say about this episode, please let us know. You can email us directly at isfitshappy@gmail.com or on any of our social medias at isfitshappy. Let your friends know about us. We'd love to have more people join the conversation and honestly have more people read this wonderful series.
Yes. We are always looking to share our love of Robin Hobb with others.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode.